Howdy. At this point, we are moving on to Chapter 7, Part 2. I want to talk a little bit more about the motivations that go into mergers and acquisitions. So there are a good number of these that we will discuss. And when we think about these different motivations, I want to ask, of all of these motivations that you see here, which of these apply to Novartis and Endocyte? So Novartis was trying to increase the scope of its portfolio, and particularly to bring in Endocyte that had technology related to making its own cancer drugs more effective. This could actually lead them to a differentiated pharmaceutical offering, which would give them market power, the ability to sell at a higher price or to attract new customers. This overcomes entry barriers into new technologies, can help reduce the cost of product development. They're able to take a new product to market faster. It can be lower risk than developing new products. Sometimes, particularly in pharmaceuticals, firms will spend billions of dollars and may end up not actually having anything work out. Acquisitions can lower that risk. They can achieve increased diversification. They reshape the firm's competitive scope, and the firm is able to learn and develop new capabilities. Pretty much every one of these applies to Novartis and Endocyte. So let's talk a little bit more about market power. So factors increase market power when there's the ability to sell goods or services above competitive levels. Think of a differentiation strategy. Or costs of primary support activities are below those of competitors. This might support a cost leadership strategy. Either way, there is the goal of attracting new customers and strengthening the firm's market position. So a firm's size, resources, and capabilities can also simply give it a superior ability to compete, increasing the firm's market power. Acquisitions intended to increase market power are subject to regulatory review and analysis by financial markets. Sometimes governments disallow acquisitions from happening in the first place, but sometimes also shareholders and investors end up responding in such a way that an acquisition doesn't end up happening. So in order to increase market power, firms use horizontal, vertical, and related acquisitions. Horizontal acquisitions are those when the company acquires a firm in its own industry. Horizontal acquisitions can increase a firm's market power by exploiting cost and revenue-based synergies, and they result in higher performance when the firms have similar overall characteristics. A vertical acquisition refers to a firm acquiring a supplier or a distributor of one or more of its products. Through a vertical acquisition, the newly formed firm controls additional parts of the value chain, leading to increased market power. With a related acquisition, the firm is acquiring another firm in a related industry. And through this related acquisition, firms seek to create value through the synergy that can be generated by integrating resources and capabilities. Entry barriers, as we've discussed actually earlier in the semester, can make it difficult for firms to enter new markets or new industries. So acquisitions can be used as a way to overcome these entry barriers that may be related to economies of scale or differentiated products. With a cross-border acquisition, sometimes the entry barrier is simply the difficulty of getting started, understanding the culture, getting through government approvals to get started. If you can simply acquire a firm that has already done all of that and is already established, that can be a quicker and easier way to overcome the entry barriers related to cross-border acquisitions. An example of this was PayPal entering China through the acquisition of another payment firm that already was operating there. We may also talk about the cost of new product development and speed to market. So internal development of new products is often perceived as a high-risk activity. Acquisitions can allow a firm to gain access to new and current products that are new to the firm. Returns can be more predictable because you already know what products are available and how they are being received by the market. And that may allow you to price the acquisition a little more accurately. Increased diversification is another potential benefit. So it's relatively uncommon for a firm to develop new products internally to diversify its product lines. And it can be difficult for companies to develop products that significantly differ from the current product lines. When you think here about Cola Wars, which we looked at earlier, if you think of Pepsi getting into the snack lines by acquiring Frito-Lay back in the 1960s, this allowed them to be more diversified. They perhaps could have developed snack lines on their own, but this was seen as the best option. So acquisitions to diversify a firm can be the quickest and easiest way to change its portfolio. Both related diversification and unrelated diversification strategies can be implemented through acquisitions. The more related the acquired firm is to the acquiring firm, the greater is the probability that the acquisition will succeed. So an acquisition can also change a firm's competitive scope. It can reduce the negative, effective, and intense rivalry on a firm's financial performance, and it can reduce a firm's dependence on one or more products or markets. Again, think of PepsiCo. By acquiring Frito-Lay, they were able to generate greater financial strength and have actually competed with Coca-Cola better since the 1960s and that acquisition than they did before. And also, PepsiCo has the benefit of not being reliant entirely on the beverage market. They also can reduce a firm's dependence on specific markets, altering the firm's competitive scope and giving it more options. This can also lead to a firm learning and developing new capabilities. Perhaps that may be related to special technological capabilities, knowledge base, or simply reducing inertia, where sometimes firms kind of get stuck with what they're doing. This allows them to kind of break through and not be stuck anymore. Firms should acquire other firms with different but related complementary capabilities in order to build their own knowledge base. An example here, some of you may or may not be familiar with Tally or TraceMe. This is a company that Russell Wilson, NFL quarterback, was involved in. But the interesting thing about this is Nike, which does not normally get involved in a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but you notice there at the bottom, the main interest was in TraceMe's tech rather than Tally's, and also the team. Sometimes acquisitions are for particular parts of a company, and Nike pursued particular parts of this company through this acquisition. So question number 2, for the 2 examples of mergers and acquisitions that you identified before, what was the strategic rationale or the motivation to do that?